Welcome to this book launch of Aida Ibričević's book, Decided Return Migration, Emotions, Citizenship, Home and Belonging in Bosnia and Herzegovina. This is a book that has been recently published by the EMISCO series, and it's open access, and you can find the link also in the event information here. This book launch is being organized by the PRIO Migration Center. My name is Marta Vivan Adal. I'm a research professor at PRIO and co-directing the PRIO Migration Center. And in this event, we will hear from Aida about her exciting book. She'll take us a little bit through the making of the book, the contributions to return migration scholarship, as well as about knowledge on contemporary Bosnia and Herzegovina. Before I will allow Aida to proceed with that, I'll just take us a little bit through what we're going to do here. So first of all, I should note that this event is being recorded, which means that other people will be able to access the event later on. Furthermore, we would very much like to engage with everyone who is here, and you can do that by posing questions or offering comments through the Q&A function, which is open already and which we will be viewing and moderating. Please do that whenever you like during this event, and we'll try to get back to as many as possible of the points raised there when we get to the more open part of the conversation later on. But we will be hearing from Aida, as I mentioned. She is a global fellow here at PRIO, as well as a postdoctoral researcher at Remesso Linköping University. And after she's had her presentation, we'll hear 3 comments as well. And I'll introduce the speakers straight away, so you know who they are. And they will be then speaking in turn after Aida. So first, after Aida, we'll have my colleague Jürgen Kalling, who's also a research professor here at PRIO and co-directs the PRIO Migration Center together with me. Then we're hearing from one of Aida's colleagues at Remesso Linköping University, Professor Branka Likic-Borbic. It's wonderful to have you here with us. And last but not least, we'll hear from Professor Emeritus at University of Sussex, Russell King. We'll then have a conversation between the 3 and Aida, and we'll also be feeding in questions or comments that you have all been writing in the Q&A section. So with that, Aida, I'd like to pass the floor to you.
Thank you, Marta, for the introduction and for moderating this event. Thank you to the discussants, Branka, Russell, and Jürgen, for participating in this event. And many thanks to the PRIO Migration Center for hosting this book launch. Last but certainly not least, many thanks to the PRIO Comms team and to Aisha for facilitating our gathering. Thank you all of you in the audience, for being here with us for the next hour. As Marta said, I am Aida Ibričević, the author of Decided Return Migration, Emotions, Citizenship, Home and Belonging in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And in the next 10 to 12 minutes, I will try to present some of the main features of my book. I will start with an outline of my presentation. To begin, I will talk about the making of this book and the theoretical problem it addresses, about how the book is situated in the current literatures, summarized in the conceptual framework in Chapter 2. Next, I will discuss the book's empirical chapters, Chapters 3 to 5, and how these results connect within a conceptual model presented in Chapter 6. Finally, I will look at the contributions my book makes to the existing literatures, because some of these are literatures that are distinct from each other. In the end, I'll be reading the last paragraph of my book, both to give a sense of the text and to provide a glimpse at contemporary Bosnia and Herzegovina. The book that we have in front of us is the product of an 8-year journey, starting in 2016 with the research designed for my dissertation. My PhD degree was awarded from Istanbul Bilgi Üniversitesi in 2019, and the book was published in June of this year. In between, there were quite a few steps that perhaps we don't have that much time to cover right now. Let's dive into this study by firstly meeting my study participants. They're voluntary return migrants whose return fits the characterization of what Jean-Pierre Cassarino in his study of 2008 refers to as decided or chosen return. The majority of participants have dual, or in some cases triple, citizenship. They're highly integrated in the host state in economic, political, social, academic, and cultural ways. For example, many of them have also attained their higher education in the host state in the host state's language. There's also a lack of compulsion to return from the side of their families at home. They do not have aging parents needing care in the home state. The return is also self-organized without incentives provided by so-called assisted voluntary programs, or any other government involvement. The return is characterized by financial risk, as all study participants are of working age without pension rights earned in the host state. The sample is diversified along various demographic characteristics, such as covering both minority and majority return, variety in family structure, ethnicity, religion, and levels of religiosity, for example. To learn more about the study participants, please turn to section 1.6 of chapter 1. We will find an explanation of all methodological issues, including how data were collected and how they were analyzed. My study is set within the context of Bosnia and Herzegovina in its contemporary sense. The book addresses the case country by firstly problematizing its, what I would refer to as unfortunately continued labeling as a post-conflict society. I begin this examination by looking at this label as relatively absurd to be used even 3 decades after cessation of open warfare, but conclude that due to the unending quote-unquote war through other means, in Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian, rat drugim sredstvima, this label unfortunately still is applicable. Next, I look at the Bosnian diaspora, post-war return migration, and the 2-tiered structure of BIH citizenship. I end this section of the book by looking at the highly problematic constituents peoples, quote-unquote, category, institutionalizing ethnic belonging in the Dayton Peace Agreement Constitution. Chapter 2 starts by defining the theoretical problem, which in summary is creating a nexus between the main theoretical areas presented within the book's conceptual framework. These are voluntary decided return migration, diaspora transnationalism, political emotions, citizenship, emotional/affective/intimate citizenship, home, and belonging. Chapters 3, 4, and 5, and 6 present the empirical results of my study. Starting with chapter 3, there we see how the process of return and reintegration into post-conflict society takes shape. I firstly look at the decision to return and find that this type of return is primarily emotionally motivated. These motivations range from a need to give back to the host state, personalizing collective tragedy and trauma recovery, a desire to be close to family members and religious traditions, a post-materialist value system, and initial enthusiasm upon return. These emotional motivations drive the decision to return, but decided return happens with an economic minimum requirement that needs to be satisfied. This economic minimum requirement comes in the form of a business opportunity in Bosnia, offering self-employment, very frequently observed in other return migration settings, or as a job offer. In other words, the emotional motivations come into play once this economic minimum has been satisfied. But the return itself is not motivated by the assumption of neoclassical economics relating to the maximization of economic interest. Upon my return, participants encounter various obstacles, such as corruption, which transcends ethnic boundaries, ethnicity-based discrimination, a general quote-unquote victimhood mentality, a high unemployment rate coupled with low living standards, and a constant sense of political uncertainty. To these obstacles, the returnees respond with reintegration strategies, such as self-reliance and resilience, political activism, self-employment, humor even, as well as contemplating other alternatives, unfortunately including re-immigration. Still, when asked whether they consider their return projects to be successful, 32 out of the 35 people I interviewed responded with a resounding yes, giving hope that this type of return could be sustainable. In chapter 4, I dissect and discuss the individual emotions constituting the emotional dimension of BIH citizenship. These range from rage, anger, frustration, fear, guilt, hatred, disgust, shame, pity and empathy, sorrow, disappointment, powerlessness, nostalgia, patriotic love, pride, defiance, happiness and joy, all the way to hope. In chapter 5, I look at home as found in family, time, and place, and I especially discuss the possibility of looking at the entire state territory as place, asking the question whether it's possible to feel at home on the entire BIH state territory for everybody. The following sections of chapter 5 disentangle belonging, looking at relational belonging or neighborliness, ethnic, religious, linguistic, landscape, and economic belonging. This section places particular focus on civic belonging, asking the question of whether citizenship can be the main expression of an individual's identity in Bosnia and Herzegovina. My empirical chapters end with a conceptual model aimed at connecting the dots by placing feeling safe and secure at the center. Feeling safe and secure is found to be strongly associated with the foreign or pragmatic, flexible, instrumental citizenship, with home and with belonging, with a weak co-occurrence with the emotional home state Bosnian citizenship. There's a small possibility, in other words, the Bosnian citizenship, the emotional citizenship of the returnees does not make the returnees feel safe. And this is the key finding, unlike the other categories that I examined. There is a small possibility for a stronger connection between feeling safe and secure and the emotional citizenship, allowing this citizenship, the citizenship of Bosnia and Herzegovina, to be conceptualized as home and belonging. This possibility comes in the form of feeling at home on the entire territory of the BiH state and in the form of civic belonging. The final chapter of the book ends by placing my empirical results in direct conversation with relevant literatures and by identifying the areas of my contribution. I look at how my book contributes to various theory areas laid out in the conceptual framework. I end the book by looking at how the politics of belonging in Bosnia and Herzegovina need to change in order for BiH to join the EU, by introducing constitutional changes that align the BiH constitution with existing rulings of the European Court of Human Rights, abbreviation ECTHR. Just to give you a sense of the text of my book and to provide a glimpse into how my book treats these issues, I will now read to you, if you allow, to you from my book's final paragraph. So I'm just going to read the final paragraph of my book. Genocide, ethnic cleansing, and mass atrocities should not and cannot be the path towards state formation, not post-World War II, after the horrors of the Holocaust and following the international community's stated commitment towards never again. However, there is an intense battle between professed European values as expressed by rulings of the ECTHR, European Court of Human Rights, and realities on the ground in Bosnia and Herzegovina. These daily realities are dominated by ethno-national oligarchies furthering secessionist agendas, and unfortunately an increasingly appeasing attitude towards them by individual European governments, the EU, and other international actors, including the United States. On December 15, 2022, Bosnia and Herzegovina was officially granted EU candidate status. The BiH constitution needs to change according to rulings of the ECTHR in order for BiH to join the EU. However, these changes cannot come with the cost of renewed violence. The politics of belonging need to change to create an inclusive polity encompassing everybody, all citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Yet these changes require domestic and international political will. If seen as a small, insignificant country in the hinterlands of Europe, BiH, with all its troubles, can easily be dismissed and ignored. But Bosnia is also an open wound, a dire warning, and a haunting question for the modern nation state, itself under pressure from ethnic, racial, and religious diversification due to increasing migratory flows and changing demographics. What path to take towards a more peaceful and democratic future for the citizen, any citizen? This question is as relevant to Bosnia as it is to any other modern European nation state. My book, if you want to learn more and read, is available open access, as Marta said, from Springer and Miska Research Series, and you can find it by going to this link and download it and read it. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Aida. So I'll just pass straight away to the first set of comments and thoughts and questions from Jørgen.
Thank you, Marta, and thank you very much, Aida. So, as Marta said, I'm also a research professor at PRIO, and I've had the pleasure of interacting with Aida for a couple of years now, when she's been attached to PRIO under our Global Fellows program. I also spent some time here, which has been great. And it was really a pleasure to be asked to contribute to this book launch and have an extra incentive to take time to sit down and read the book. So I remember, of course, I first came across the book before it was published and before I was sort of asked to participate, and was puzzled at first by the title. And we've briefly discussed it as well, this notion of decided return migration. But it really also goes to the core of what I find the most interesting about this book, sort of coming from my perspective, which I'll get back to in a moment. This notion of return when it is not required by outside forces, and in a context where there is so much attention to sort of making people return or compelling them to return in some way, there's a lot to learn from looking at what we might call sort of voluntary return, or decided return, or chosen return. So when I read the book and saw that Jean-Pierre Cassarino had introduced this notion of decided, as Aida mentioned, together with chosen, saying decided or chosen migration, I think it made a lot of sense to me. These two words together really capture something about the kinds of migration processes that Aida writes about, which I think are fascinating in general, and which I think the book brings out really well. But if we take a step back and look at the book and its subtitle and its topics that it covers, I think it has sort of three main pillars, if you wish. One, of course, is return migration, and then the second is citizenship and the concept of emotional citizenship, or the emotional dimensions of citizenship. And then there is the Bosnia specific, and I think the book has a lot to offer to readers who are interested in any one of those three, or more of them in combination. Unlike Marta and others, I've never done research on citizenship, and it's not, to be honest, it's not the thing that interests me the most in this book either, but that's fine. And I've never been to Bosnia or had a specific interest in Bosnia, other than knowing the kinds of background things that it also points to, and which have fascinated me as a migration scholar. And I think this opportunity to really understand more, for instance, what it means to really be a post-conflict society after so many years has been quite illuminating. But it is then, of course, really the return migration element that speaks to me as a migration scholar. And I did research specifically on return migration together with Marta and others in a big project about a decade ago. And then we were also really interested in this drawn out process of return occurring sort of as a possibility from the moment of the initial migration, and then sometimes sort of lurking in the backgrounds of people's lives and awareness throughout years or decades abroad, and maybe existing as a future plan or dream until people passed away not having returned. Or, of course, that they did return, but then sometimes also with this lingering maybe doubt, either doubt, was this the right thing to do or not, or such extensive transnational ties and practices that in a way it was hard to say whether people had returned or not. But this notion of return migration as being much more of a drawn out process than just an event at the time when people made the trip. But even so, of course, that move hinges on the decision that the title alludes to, and it's been fascinating to read about the sort of dynamics or motivation of that decision, and I really enjoyed how Aida foregrounded the emotional aspect of it, and I think in a way, what I took away from the book more broadly beyond this context is really about how this full range of emotions that Aida writes about can tell us a lot more and more generally about how people feel about migrating, and also how people feel about belonging to a society or not. So even now, when I'm doing research on prospective migration by people who've not migrated already, I'm taking something away from this book in terms of the range of emotions that people have around their own belonging to a society. What I would like to ask Aida about is really linked to this notion of the processual or extended temporal dimension of return migration. And in the context of Bosnia and her book, of course, we have a lot of rich quotes from the interviews in the book that are really inspiring to read individually, but I'm curious about more of the sort of bird's eye perspective on how people felt about the sort of finality of return in this context of conflicting feelings. Was it the case that because the emotions were so central and that there was this sort of higher purpose of returning that in a way helps settle the finality of having returned, regardless of the sort of good and bad aspects of leading everyday life in Bosnia? Or did these conflictual feelings really make the decision to return open-ended and unfinished in a way? And also linking to the emotional and reading this sort of in the context of the policy debates on return migration and the interest in sustainable return, which is a problematic topic or concept for many different reasons. I'm wondering to what extent it makes sense to think of the emotional sustainability of return. Is it, and if so, what that implies? Because it seems to me that from reading Aida's book that emotions are such a key part of the explanation for why people choose to go back in the first place, and how they feel about and potentially act upon that decision after they've returned. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jørgen. I can see Aida is making some notes. That's good, and we'll be looking forward to hearing your thoughts and reactions later on. I would just like to remind anyone in the audience who might want to also give a comment or a question that the Q&A function is there, and it should be open and working. So if you'd like to ask any questions or give any comments, please do that via that channel. It may not be visible immediately because we'll have to moderate and then publish it so that everyone can see it. But wonderful if you'd like to engage in that way. And without further ado, Branka, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jørgen. Thank you, Aida. And thank you for the invitation to participate in this book launch event in such an esteemed company. I am delighted that Aida's book has been published. As she mentioned in the introduction, she submitted the book proposal to IMISCO Springer Book Series editorial board in 2021, and Anna Trifliandu and myself, as assigned reviewers, strongly recommended her book. We found that the thematic and scope of the book was compelling, the overall perspective and empirical material novel, raising important conceptual and issues, and in the field of migration studies, such as not only return, but also negotiating nation, ethnicity, identity, diversity, and not least citizenship. There are two main issues I would like to raise here. And the first one relates to the negotiation of citizenship, especially between ethnic and civic citizenship, and considering complexity of multiple and split belongings, in the context of post-conflict Bosnia and Herzegovina and state-building contradictory dynamics. My main question is if your informants emphasize other kinds of identities and solidarities besides family and narrow defined community, such as, for example, occupational, cultural, trans-ethnic networks and solidarities. I based this question on my research of integration of Bosnians in host societies, and I'm using the concept of emplacement following emigration as a displacement, forced migration, of course, as a displacement, which has shown that successful integration is actually marked by the process of emplacement and strong networks between and across different groups. So, for example, I see that the concept of solidarity in your book is mentioned only 6 times. And I would like to give me kind of a response to the question if it's your own choice as a researcher not to focus on that. So my second question relates to the emotional citizenship, which I find really fascinating. But the question is, how specific are all those emotions you identified in your informant stories in comparison to all other citizens' emotions on the whole territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and not least your own? And in connection to that, I wonder, and to the timely dimension of your research, that was empirical research was done 2017. I was wondering if you have been considering to revisit your informants and see the emotional changes, to trace emotional changes, what has happened since then. And we have had very many crisis events, basically crisis-driven changes, not least in the field of migration. And last but not least, when it comes to this reality of restrictive turn in migration policy today in the multi-level governance, global, regional, European, and not least the developed host states, which are now considering very discriminatory, you could say, discriminatory measures and policies for return. I wonder how you see your research and future research, this research, but even future research in the field of migration and not just return, research on return policies, how you could contribute to the critical approach to the research on return in the field of migration studies, and what is your planned research in that field? And thank you.
Thank you so much, Branka. Unfortunately, we have some challenges with connecting with Russell, so he sends his apologies, but he has, as usual with Russell, prepared very well. So you'll have to make do with me, but I will pass on his comments and questions so that we can all benefit from them, even without him being present. So first of all, Russell is asking me to share with you all, but also especially with you, Aida, praise for your book and for the work that lies behind it, and for this in-depth engagement, specifically with this case, and focusing on the questions of return that he's been working on for so many years. He's also asking a question about the term decided in the title. And I think this sort of strikes an echo with some of the points that Jürgen was making in terms of thinking through Cassarino's work also on the sort of decided, chosen returns. I think you can interweave some comments probably with what Jürgen was asking about as well. Because Russell has a series of other questions for you, so I'll now read them out. He is asking a question about time or temporalities in relation to your book. And more specifically, he's interested in the roles of time and temporalities in the return process, as well as in the outcomes. And more specifically, that relates to the ages of people in the process and afterwards. Specifically, he's also interested in children's experiences and also whether there are gendered aspects to this. Furthermore, he is also interested in what you might have to say about similarities or differences between rural and urban destinations and how they shape return experiences. And then finally, he's also asking a question in relation to returnees' challenges, disappointments. So first of all, to what extent are they experiencing those? And to the extent that they are experiencing those in their post-return lives, do you find any traces of reverse transnationalism in their experiences? And if so, what does that look like? And how does it matter anyway? Are there particular effective material or mobility ties to the places that they used to live? So I also would like to ask some questions, but I'm going to refrain from doing that for now and see whether we have time later on and see whether maybe also others in the audience might have questions as well. So I think I would like to pass back to you now, Aida. I'm sure you have a million thoughts about how you might attack this, but I'll pass the floor to you and you can mix and match how you want to respond and comment on these various observations that have been made. Aida.
Yes, thank you so much to Jürgen and to Ranka and to Russell for the comments and for the questions. Thank you, Marta, for reading Russell's comments and questions. I'm going to try, since I have about 6 or maybe 8 questions to answer, I'm going to try to answer them, kind of skip around answering them in some kind of order that sort of makes sense to me as I was just writing them down and thinking through what I could answer as you were reading, as you were speaking. I would like to start with the policy debates on return migration and interest in sustainable return. Sustainable return, again, a problematized notion, also problematized in the book. Within the book, I use a measure of sustainability that is adopted by other authors, and that is kind of their subjective evaluation of success. And why is this relevant? Well, it's relevant because since these are people who do have citizenships of the host states, since they are integrated in the host states, they can easily go back. Well, exactly, it's not exactly that automatic, but at least legally speaking, economically speaking, they could go back, they could re-emigrate when they wanted to. So this compulsion to stay is not there. So then what's keeping them in Bosnia? What's keeping them is their own self-evaluation that this is successful. As long as it's successful, they'll stay. They won't consider alternatives. So that's the measure of sustainability that I used. Now, how is this relevant to policy debates? To start with that question, it's relevant only in the case of this, well, problematized notion of decided or chosen return. Again, these people have to return in the first place because they want to. Voluntariness has to be guaranteed. And the reason why I changed the title from voluntary return to decided return, drawing upon the work of Jean-Pierre Cassarino, is just to emphasize that voluntary, really, there are lots of prerequisites that need to be satisfied before we can talk about free will and voluntariness. And that, hopefully, the book will contribute to that policy debate on voluntariness. Now, your question on sustainability and this type of return in terms of policy, again, it goes back to the evaluation. As long as they're happy here, they'll stay. As long as they see this as a good outcome for themselves, they'll stay. So what can be done from a policy perspective? Well, the home state can do things to accommodate the returnees. There are lots of things that the home state can do. The host state Well, referring to some of Branka's comments on the restrictive nature and increasing the restrictive turn on migration policies within the host states, the host state, well, I don't want to say I don't want to give them ideas what they should be doing to promote this kind of return, but yeah, the host state is also relevant in this, in the sense that this return really, again, if it's free-willed, it has to be free-willed from both the home and the host state. So that would be my answer to the first question on policy. Sorry, Jürgen's second question on policy. But Jürgen's question on the bird's eye perspective, I was thinking how I could possibly, because working with the data on such a micro level and trying to contextualize all these various responses, really, and that's the nature of qualitative work, I would assume. I would have to do a quantitative study, I guess. Maybe I want to give the wishy-washy of answer of more research is needed, and hopefully representative sample, quantitative and so forth, that would give a better answer, that give a more bird's eye view to this. Coming up with a bird's eye view just based on qualitative data that is there to identify all the issues and kind of theoretically saturate with a sample not intending to have representativeness, but just identifying the various dimensions of the issue is a little bit difficult for me. So I hope that answer kind of satisfies you for right now. Other than that, I'm not really sure that I can give a totally bird's eye perspective that would really be representative of what this issue is about. So Branka's question on solidarity, negotiating citizenship between ethnic and civics, or post-ethnic or civic citizenship, considering multiple and split belonging. Do my informants emphasize other types of belonging? Yes, my informants emphasize, interestingly enough, what is commonly associated with Bosnia as ethnic belonging being central place is not what I find. I mean, what they all emphasize, and that's covered in the first section of the belonging part, the first thing that they emphasize is relational belonging, and particularly neighborliness. So neighborliness is problematized. Obviously, there are problems with neighborliness. So much has been written on neighborliness in Bosnia, and interestingly, even with I'm tempted to read some parts, but I can direct you to pages like 189 and 190 as a result, as a kind of answer to your question of belonging and solidarities that transcend these standard categories of ethnicity and religious and narrow defined community or even family. So I would definitely point to neighborliness. There are others, such as landscape belonging, where people belong to a certain landscape, which is very different from sort of nation and soil kind of ethno-nationalist discourse, where they just identify with a certain, let's say, geographic terrain, and that gives them belonging that transcends the standard categories. If you're talking about solidarity, if I were to write a new book about this, and we'll come to the longitudinal question, is definitely interesting, how how things change over time. But something that I would really be dying to write about if I were to research Bosnia more are solidarities on environmental activism, solidarities that develop the cross-ethnic boundaries, that cross-national boundaries, are cross Western Balkans, that unite people around issues such as protecting our rivers, for example, or and the effect that return migrants have in that, or diaspora members have in that as well. So I would definitely look at that. For 2017, the summer and fall, when I did the data collection, I can't speak to more solidarities than what I have laid out in the book. If I were to do it again, my primary interest would be, let's say, for example, in environmental activism as sort of key to continued civilized life in the entire region. So that's what I would say about the solidarity question. Now, the emotional citizenship question and how specific are all these emotions in comparison to the returnees, in comparison to other citizens' emotions, including my own. That I find this question to be really fascinating. And I have a section in the methodology that discusses the problems, the sort of benefits and the problems associated with being in such close proximity to the case. I mean, not only am I a Bosnian citizen, but I am solely a Bosnian citizen. I do not have dual citizenship. I was born here, but also my life experience as a researcher closely resembles the experience of a lot of the returnees. So there is a real danger of subjectivity in this, and I have made quite a bit of effort to limit that subjectivity by both writing field notes, which are available as a data source as well in parallel with the transcripts of the interviews, and a reflective journal on talking about my own emotions. Now, this is an inductive study. It's an interpretivist design. So this type of interaction between researcher and data, researcher and field is just assumed to be part of the methodological design. I cannot escape that. However, I have taken measures as much as I possibly could to not allow my own subjectivities to influence data analysis as much as I could, as much as I don't know what other methodological way I would have to limit them further. Now, how do these compare to other citizens? I tried for each one of these emotions to contextualize it, and I say the emotions are context dependent. And I give other examples, for example, how shame is treated within modern Germany, or how shame is treated within the Filipino context. I mean, shame, it's the same emotion, but the context is different, and therefore the explanation of why that emotion is there. Very different contexts. Obviously, shame in the post-war German experience and shame with Filipino citizens, for example, is the contexts are completely different, but the emotion is the same. So it is important to know the context, to understand the context, to learn why this emotion is there. So for each one of the emotions, I tried to contextualize it within Bosnia, but there are some emotions that are really very characteristic of return migrants around the world, such as, for example, guilt. So I draw on the work of Loretta Baltasar, for example, or Paolo Boccagni on guilt, and guilt being such a universal emotion that all migrants around the world seem to feel. At least this is what these authors find to be true. Another emotion is disappointment, for example, since Bovenkirk, early writing on return migration, this disappointment or disillusion of return, initial enthusiasm followed by disillusion, is something that is found in the literature. So wherever I could find parallels with the Bosnian case and other similar cases that already have been covered in the literature, I did that. But I do say that in general, this is context specific, and knowledge of the context is important. Now, this still doesn't answer a question of how this is related to all citizens. I would say that there are some commonalities, except the returnees are particularly interesting because remember, they're also dual citizens. So they have this comparison with some other host state, which gives them maybe a more nuanced understanding of this issue, because they have this basis of comparison. But again, as I said with Jürgen's question, I would have to do more research on this subject to actually give a full answer that would encompass, let's say, all citizens. How do citizens of Bosnia feel as BiH citizens, regardless of whether they're returnees or not? Now, about the timely dimension of research, I have tried to stay in contact with all my study participants as much as I could. And there are even some little snippets in the footnotes where, for example, one of my interviewees, because I have their phone numbers on my phone, and one of them changed their phone numbers to Chicago. And so I wrote to him, saying this was in 2020 or something, not during COVID, obviously, either before there wasn't any travel in COVID. But anyway, I can't remember exactly the year, but I asked him, did you re-emigrate to Chicago? And he said, and I actually mentioned this in the book, he's like, no, I don't give up this easily. I don't, I'm just on tour here. He's a musician. So I'm on tour in the United States. So this is why my phone number changed. So some of them I have, there's a colleague of mine that's also in the sample that we talked about this issue, where he directly told me, he might be even on the call now, but of course I can't identify him, so forth. He writes on similar subject. He's like, well, if you were to ask me today, so many things have changed, in fact. And I'm like, well, I can show you a transcript. I mean, this is what you said in 2017. And I had this conversation with him actually just before, just in the summer of 2023. If he's here, he will know who I'm talking about. I had this conversation with him, and he said I would say something completely different because so much time has passed. Now, to cover this issue, within the sample, I have people who have returned, let's say in 95, right after the signing of Dayton. So they have had, 22 years of post-return experience. And I've spoken to people that, for example, one interview I think was the most recent one was maybe she returned like a year prior to data collection. So I did have a whole range. Now, this is not, of course, longitudinal. I would have to speak to the same people again 5 years later, 10 years later, so forth. It's not fully longitudinal in that sense, but as much as a qualitative study allows, I did have this diversity of post-return experience. So I didn't just talk to people who just returned like yesterday. There were 20 years, from 20 years to 10, 5, 50 different post-return periods. So I did try to encompass that as much as I could. But of course, if I were to do a fully longitudinal study, I would have to revisit them again and do it that way. So I believe I answered most of your questions, Branka. Yes, except for the question that I will come to later about future of research and return migration. As for Russell's question, what is the point? What is the added value of titling the book Decided Return Migration as opposed to Voluntary Return Migration? Well, I think I a little bit explained that already. It can be also misinterpreted, I would say, as decided for some. So there's a passive connotation since it's an adjective, decided return. Does it automatically mean imply agency is the question. I certainly intended it to imply agency, and that's how it's explained in the original work which I cite, which is from 2008, Jean-Pierre Cassarino. But I mean, I'm hopeful that it will just catch on as time goes by, as intending to emphasize agency, to emphasize that this is as close as we can get to free choice, right? Because the structural reasons are, and of course, I mean, if you speak to different, philosophical proclivities, the structure and agency argument is discussed in the book. To what extent are any of our decisions just based on personal agency as opposed to structure, whether in a Marxist sense or in some other sense? But as close to free choice as you can get in today's modern world, with the absence of a legal requirement to return, economic requirement, this kind of family bond, no incentive. This is, as in my understanding, as close as it can get to people actually choosing to do something that neoclassical economics does not predict they would do, because it does not lead to maximization of economic self-interest. In other words, had they stayed in the host state, they would have been better off. Ceteris paribus, all things held equal, they would have been economically better off had they stayed in the host state as opposed to returning. So this return comes with an opportunity cost. And that goes against this neoclassical economic notion of maximizing self-interest, migration as, living standards driving it, and economic decision-making driving all of it. Of course, this is just one tiny part. It doesn't destroy the paradigm of neoclassical economics, but it certainly adds to it, and there is a criticism of it in the book. So that's what I would have to say about decided or chosen return as a title of the book. Now, the question on time and temporalities, I think I answered a little bit in relation to Branka's question. What Russell is asking, children's experiences, unfortunately, not covered in the book. I didn't interview any children. There are parts of the book where I talk about the importance of having children close, having children grow up around extended family members as a motivation to return, how important that is. That is covered, but I did not actually speak to children how they're experiencing this return process. Gendered aspects are definitely there, and they're there in the home chapter. So the home section on home, and this also is in the conceptual framework on how work is understood. For example, in the work of home being understood as sort of a place of work, is either transcendent or imminent labor, both in the work of Hannah Arendt and then also other feminist writers. So that is there, where home is part, sort of an arena of freedom and exploration for the males, and a place of routine and ritual and lots of work for the females. So that I have found as any sort of aspects of gender in the book. Rural and urban destination, how they shape return experiences there is discussion of how, for example, a female returnee to Srebrenica, and she returns to Srebrenica. It works in Sarajevo, but she does return to Srebrenica, and how she's viewed by the people in Sarajevo, and how that internal displacement also plays a role in her return experience. There is that discussion. reverse transnationalism is definitely covered in the book, and there is a section called the myth of return, being in between and multiple belonging, where the returnees, for example, there's one episode where returnee to Trebinje is hiking with his friends from Switzerland, and he comes to a hilltop and places the Swiss flag in Trebinje, which is his native town, and so forth. So there is an example of an IT specialist whose nickname in Sarajevo. These are all pseudonyms, of course. So even if he's on the call, he won't recognize it because everything has been anonymized and changed. So his nickname is Jack in Sarajevo, but because he had of course, this part is just completely anonymized. It's a different actor because, again, he's known with this nickname in Sarajevo because of his connection to a famous Hollywood actor by the same name and so forth. But he doesn't, for example, use this. He uses this name in Sarajevo, but he doesn't use it in the States because he doesn't want to appear Americanized. He uses his Bosnian name. So the myth of return, pages 214 to 216, many examples of reverse transnationalism and how reverse transnationalism also can affect and aid of the sustainability of return and success of return, simply because reverse transnationalism with this multiple belonging can help people. There's one, for example, returnee who says, I'm making my shirts in Bosnia and selling them in Switzerland, making my return possible. So that reverse transnationalism and commercial ties making return more sustainable and successful. I want to leave some more time for questions, so I'd like to end here. Thank you. I didn't answer Branka's question on future return migration, but let's leave that. Let's see if we have questions. If we don't, I'll come back to that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Aida. I guess Branka and Jürgen, you might have follow-up questions as well, but I'm going to first maybe read the questions we have in the Q&A. And then if you have a burning issue, Jürgen or Branka, then give me a sign and you can ask as well. And then I'll pass back to Aida for the last few minutes to address the questions. So we have two questions in the chat. Thank you for posing those. The first one says, in your book, you refer to the BiH as an EU candidate country and list the requirements for membership. I'm curious to learn if the prospect of EU membership had an impact on the decided return, in particular as the emotion around BiH citizenship might be problematic for some and the overall national one might not be. So that's one question. You've already touched on some aspects of it, but it would be interesting to hear a bit more. The second one takes another sort of policy angle and says the UN created a framework called Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, and interestingly in paragraph 12 describes migration as an experience of being compelled to seek a future elsewhere. I've since wondered if this frame of reference is helpful. From compel, I get the sense that migration is viewed as an aberration, while staying put is the more desirable situation. From here, there is a notion of fostering sustainable return. What if the viewpoint is flipped, where staying put is the aberration? What new policies would come about and more helpful to safe, orderly and regular migration and also return? So a big question, I think, but a really interesting one. Both of them are. So I'm not seeing any crazy waving from Branka or Jürgen, so I don't know whether you are happy to let Aida just respond. And then you can add the response to Branka as well, I think, Aida, please. I think you're muted still, Aida.
Am I muted now? Okay. Yes, I did. Well, the first question is the time. This is again 2017 when data collection was done, and I have not visited in terms of follow-up interviews with the same respondents in the interim. There is a place where the only place where EU membership comes up in the transcripts of the interviews is when discussing hope. And so there is an interviewee, he talks about hope as his way of understanding BiH citizenship, and hope seen through Bosnia joining EU. And I was trying to find exactly the quote because it's very, very evocative and talks about, yes, hope. Yes, first of all, elections. This is 2017. Many people have lost hope in elections. But anyway, so elections as giving hope to people. But there's one, for example, quote that I could read exactly about Bosnia joining the EU. A major outside factor providing hope is the prospect of BiH joining the EU. Damir hopes that BiH joining the EU will make renewed conflict an impossibility. So this is the quote. So this is an interviewee who came back from Germany to Sanski Most, and his name in the book, a pseudonym of course, is Damir. I see great hope in BIH joining the EU. I believe that all this talk of secession referendums will lose their point once we become a member. We will live in a big community with borders erased, including our internal borders. This is my hope. Even the current talk of secession is only rhetoric for personal gain, staying in power, nothing else. But joining the EU will give us that hope. So this is the part where EU membership comes in, and it comes in the form of hope for Bosnia and sort of this uncertainty of constant calls for referendums, secession, renewed violence to be erased by Bosnia joining the EU. Obviously, that comes with problems that we discussed to some extent. Now, the second question on migration becoming the norm and staying put becoming the aberration is definitely interesting. The only reason why I was talking about sustainability of return is because we need to see the setting of this of this book in a country that has many more people leaving, and this many more is quantified in the book. So the immigration rates from Bosnia are staggering. I mean, the people are leaving in droves. And this is, again, quantified in the book with data and statistics that are available. Not that much data, very good quality data is available for Bosnia, but whatever is available is in the book. So within this context of staggering immigration rates, this idea of sustainable return, particularly of this type of return, where it's people who really want to return, the people that can contribute, people that can add to progress and so forth, that's the idea. So increasing that sustainability as a policy option would, in this context, be a good one. It's not necessary, but then, I mean, what is good, what is bad? These are, huge ethical and philosophical questions that I certainly cannot answer right now, and not for this book. For this particular setting, it would be, just talking to people around. It would be nice that people could return and stay. And contribute it here. So that's the basic premise of the book. Now, of course, making migration the norm and staying at home the aberration. A new world awaits. I don't know. Those are huge, big questions. And lastly, just to end, we have like 1 minute, just quickly on agenda for future research on return. Branka and I are together working with Professor Zoran Slavnic on the MORE project, which examines alternatives to, well, first of all, policies of return and readmission, and also comes up with, is trying to come up with alternatives to the current status quo. So I'm very, very excited about working on this project, and I hope to continue working on issues of governance. I'm also personally interested in returns of retirement, aging, and return. So that's something that I see coming out of the book. I hope that answers the question. We don't have much more time, so I do need to end here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aida. And I'd also like to thank Branka and Jürgen, and also Russell, who was not able to be here, but still was here. And thank you to all the attendees who've been here. And I'd simply like to end by warmly encouraging all of you to explore the book further. It is open access, available online. It is a very good read, and I'm sure everyone will come away with a lot of knowledge and also questions to ponder for the future. Thank you very much for being here.